the collapse came, it did not arrive with bombs or plagues, but with applause. Screens everywhere bloomed with small, bright pictures that said everything, so the advertisers promised, faster than any tongue could move. An apple for hunger, a lightning bolt for anger, a blue droplet for sorrow. The glyphs were clean and innocent, and people were tired of the argumentative snarl of sentences, so they traded language for icons, arguments for swipes, and woke to find ordinary words piled like dead leaves in the gutters. Within a generation, voices still made sound, but speech had hardened into discrete symbols flashed on wrists, glasses, walls. Those who tried to string letters together were considered eccentrics, sometimes dissidents. The Council of the Simple Sign, part clergy, part police, watched to ensure the old chaos never returned. Rin was born mute into that noiseless plenty. A fever in infancy seared the cords in his throat. Doctors had no cure. But the disability did little to mark him as different. Most citizens no longer bothered to speak aloud. They tapped a bracelet, projected a swirl of looping images, and moved on. Rin, however, had always felt the bruise of a missing limb. He was mute in a culture already deaf, and so he noticed the silence twice. Curiosity clung to him the way dust clung to abandoned billboards. He studied iconography at the Institute, memorizing the pedigree of each sanctioned glyph. Who designed it, what nuance it captured, and most importantly, what nuance had been removed so it might fit the approved set. By 30, he was senior historian at the Central Archive of Icons, charged with cataloging minor variations before the council purged them from everyday use. Rin wrote meticulous reports in the cramped shorthand of the era, a line of square brackets, a spark, a pointing hand. His colleagues praised his diligence, yet he felt as if he were embalming butterflies, pinning color while killing flight. Because he could not speak, he spent evenings listening to sounds instead. The wind rattling through elevator shafts, the hiss of solar trolleys, the rare murmur of an elderly pair remembering how to quarrel with syllables. Rin imagined what those forgotten noises meant. He traced shapes with his finger on the kitchen counter, inventing letters he had never seen. There had to be more than the archive allowed. The discovery came disguised as routine maintenance. A monorail tunnel near the old riverfront cracked after heavy rains, and engineers summoned the archive to identify a cluster of obsolete safety symbols uncovered behind a collapsed retaining wall. Rin volunteered for the survey, eager to escape fluorescent lights. The tunnel reeked of wet rust. Search beacons grazed deep gouges in the masonry, and behind one gouge he glimpsed something stranger than any glyph. A line of angular ink on rotten wood, not icon, but instruction. He pried loose a panel, and stale air exhaled from a cavity beyond. Inside lay a stone staircase spiraling down. The engineers were busy with structural readings. No one noticed him slip through the opening. Rin descended into temperature that belonged to geology rather than architecture. At the bottom, his torch revealed a cathedral of shelves. Books tens of thousands rose like tiered orchards, their spines furry with mold, yet mostly intact. A subterranean library buried perhaps during the panic riots, sealed from the era of sentences to wait for someone who craved them. Rin's pulse hammered. He had seen books only in contraband photographs. The council taught that pages were tinder for civil war. He reached out, and the first one he touched crumbled at the edges but opened. Letters marched in disciplined rows, not pictures but processes, little machines of meaning. He could not pronounce them, but as his eyes traveled line after line he felt interior organs shift, as though every paragraph rewired his lungs. He read until batteries died and darkness insisted he leave. He returned night after night, fabricating inspection orders, logging decoy data. He learned the tunnel geography so well he could walk it blind. By the third week he had smuggled 20 books to his apartment. He cleaned each gently, scanning pages into an encrypted slate. He found primers that taught phonetics, diagrams of tongues and mouths, air channeled over teeth. Secretly, he pressed thumb and forefinger to his silent throat, imagining the vibration of a voice he would never possess. With reading came writing. Rin bought blank notebooks from a craft stall, claiming they were for icon sketches. At dusk, He closed the blinds and practiced letters beneath an antique desk lamp. He copied sentences from the contraband trove, amazed at their elasticity, past, future, conditional, the granular care of punctuation, the luxury of synonyms. Words did not merely point. They questioned, teased, disagreed, apologized. By the end of autumn, he could draft small essays no Glyph could have compressed. One rainy shift, his colleague Dala caught him staring too long at a confiscated safety sign. She was a bright-eyed archivist who sharpened every report with sly humor, mostly illegal puns, built from visual symbols, which the administrators rarely noticed. Dala frowned at Rin's distraction, then flicked a Glyph, meaning, "Everything okay?" Rin hesitated, then traced a circle on his palm, an old children's code for "I must show you something." They met after curfew by the hush of a freight elevator. Rin led her through the tunnel maze to the hidden library, heart thundering with fear that she might betray him. He armed himself with trust, and trust was rewarded. As Dala stepped onto the stone floor, her face slanted open in shock, then wonder. She lifted a volume, brushed mold from its cover, read a line aloud. The echoes of her voice danced like startled swallows among the stacks. But surveillance sensors clung to the city's skin like barnacles. 2 engineers had reported unauthorized power draws in the tunnel. A pattern recognition crawler flagged Rin's ID transit more times than maintenance required. The Ministry of Clarity Enforcement branch of the council opened a file. Its lead officer, Carr, believed fervently that complexity birthed dissent. He had supervised the purges of color adjectives 3 years earlier and wore on his sleeve the stylized eraser badge of that triumph. Carr summoned Rin for an interview. The historian arrived with calm posture but racing mind. Questions came structured as glyph strings projected onto a translucent wall. Where do you spend nights? Why gather extra archival batteries? Any contact with pre-collapse materials? Rin answered with sanctioned tokens, meaning routine inspection, research, negative. His pulse, however, betrayed a spike visible on biometric logs. Carr scheduled deeper monitoring. That evening, Rin found the hidden library's entrance sealed by fresh concrete and an official sigil. An open eye centered in a broken book. He reeled, knees numb, but the ministry had misjudged the labyrinth. Water seepage from the riverfront had carved alternative passages. After hours of desperate scraping, Rin and Dala reopened a muddy ventilation shaft that spilled them into the stacks. The council had not yet arrived. They had time, perhaps days, to decide how history would pivot. Rin proposed digitizing the shelves, but even compressed files would betray bandwidth spikes in state router. Dala argued for boldness, let language loose. If citizens tasted the forbidden, policing would become impossible. They laid out a plan. Choose fragments short enough to fit ordinary projection bracelets, yet long enough to reveal what glyphs obscured. They found a battered portable press probably once used for protest flyers stored behind crates of encyclopedias. Dala restored its gears. Rin set metal tight, discovering the tactile thrill of arranging letters into battalions of defiance. Their first pamphlet carried a single sentence from an ancient essay on liberty. Freedom is the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. They printed 500 copies on tissue-thin salvage paper, each folded to resemble a common smile glyph. Couriers posing as street sweepers scattered them on park benches, train seats, food kiosks. Morning commuters grabbed the folds, expecting credit vouchers, snapped them open, and confronted syntax. Some laughed at the archaic shapes, but others sounded words under their breath, awakening muscles long dormant. The ministry responded within hours. Drones vacuumed litter, and walls flashed public advisories. Knowledge delays progress. Yet the infection had begun. Social feeds erupted with blurred screenshots of phrases nobody could translate alone. People started meeting to puzzle letters out loud, relearning vowels by candlelight. Carr traced the typography to the antique press listed in a forgotten registry. Pressure narrowed on the tunnel district. Rin and Dala moved the operation deeper, into the sewer aqueduct where arches amplified the roar of river water. Volunteers, students, retirees, even a pastry vendor who missed menu poetry came nightly to copy passages by hand. They recited them, trading memory for memory. Soon verse returned, wearing unfamiliar accents but undeniably alive. One snowy dawn, sirens sliced the hush. Black-suited officers sealed perimeter gates. Scanners sniffed for cellulose. Rin had known this strike would arrive, yet still shook when the library doors boomed under battering rams. He and Dalla shepherded volunteers through a rip in the floor that dropped into a drain channel. Above, shelves splintered. Rin refused to leave the heart of the trove. He limped back to the central chamber, clutching a leather volume titled Dictionary of the Lost Tongue. Carr stepped through smoke with the lantern drone, boots crunching paper shards. He raised a pistol that projected a crimson stop symbol on Rin's chest. His eye ticked with something nearly human regret, perhaps. In glyphs, he commanded, "Surrender materials." Rin slowly opened the dictionary, tore out the title page, knelt and slid it across the floor. On the blank side, he wrote in full words, his pen juddering, "If simplification made us peaceful, why are you armed?" He held the page up. Carr read silently, letters reflected in his corneas like constellations rediscovered. His jaw flexed. He fired anyway, but not at Rin. The bullet hit an overhead sprinkler pipe. Water erupted, drenching the room, fanning outward in sheets. Flames that ministry sappers had set to purge the shelves hissed into steam. Smoke wavered, fire alarms howled. Now confusion reigned, and Carr barked orders to a squad already too busy keeping their electronics dry. Rin seized the moment. He slammed shut ISILs to create a corridor, then pushed carts of books toward the drainage breach. Dalla and 2 volunteers appeared, hair plastered to skulls, and helped heap volumes into waterproof crates. The library would drown, but drowning preserved better than burning. They shoved the crates into the culvert and leapt after them, half sliding, half swimming through tunnels, until the water spat them into the river outside the city wall. Night sagged under low clouds. Along the far bank, temporary huts of the displaced lined muddy fields. Rin and Dalla hauled crates ashore. Refugees watched, curious. Dalla chose a slim children's reader, opened it before the nearest cluster of families, and began to speak. The words were simple: cat, window, rain, but to listeners they sounded like myth. Children repeated them, giggling. Adults whispered, trying shapes of consonants. Across the water, downtown flickered with censorship bulletins. Unauthorized phonemes detected. Remain indoors. Yet Rin felt the tide turning. Smugglers would ferry books hidden in rice sacks. Teachers would spring from secret classes. And words once revived bred exponentially. You could no more quarantine vocabulary than you could dam the wind. Weeks passed. The regime tightened, then frayed. Carr was demoted for the sprinkler fiasco. Rumors said he spent evenings practicing pronunciation of his own name. The council commissioned new propaganda, but slogans looked limp beside living grammar. Citizens began appending stray syllables to glyph messages, daring security filters to react. When the filters did, the outrage fed the cycle. Rin remained mute, yet for the first time he did not feel voiceless. He wandered campfires, writing stories on scraps, handing them to strangers who read aloud on the spot. The sound of narrative rolled over the fields like weather warm enough to seed crops. Dalla teased him that someday he'd be famous. He shrugged, smiling crookedly. He had never wanted fame, only resonance, the echo of thought meeting air without permission. One dawn of pale gold sun, a small boy rummaged through the crates and found the dictionary's wet remains. He approached Rin, pointing at an entry, hope, and asked the historian to explain. Rin touched his throat, a silent apology, but then took charcoal and wrote on a plank. Hope is a story we tell the future, so the future will invite us in. The boy sounded each word, slow but certain, and ran off to show others. Rin watched him go, the plank raised overhead like a flag. He felt something stir where unused voice should have dwelt. Not pain, not lack, but a fullness so complete it required no sound. Around him the camp buzzed with sentences, rough-edged yet expanding. Sentences that would birth paragraphs, essays, treatises, a parliament of possibilities. Behind the horizon, the city still smoldered with authority, but its grip slackened every time someone chose a verb instead of an icon. Revolutions need not sprint. Erosion works quieter miracles. Rin inhaled river air ripe with silt and new beginnings. He knelt by a crate, pulled out a soaked but salvageable anthology, and opened to the midpoint. Pages clung together, resisting separation, then surrendered with a sigh like cloth rippling free in wind. He began to read, eyes darting over commas and semicolons as if they were stepping stones across a chasm. He mouthed shapes he could not voice, tasting them on an invisible palate. Each word found shelter in his memory, building a house whose architecture no regime could flatten because it was made of breath and imagination alone. Around him dawn lengthened, and the camp's babble of newborn language rose, stumbling, inventive, unstoppable. The world was speaking again, and though Rin would never utter a single syllable, he had given it back its mouth.